Thanks, Shariki, and thanks to the roundtable. It's so great to be with all of you here today. At KaBOOM, we're really focused on making it as easy as possible for all kids to play by transforming the built environment, and that starts with kids growing up in poverty. And I'm just looking for here we go, great. Usually when I speak to a group, I have to spend the first few minutes talking about why play is so important for kids, but I saw all of you do the physical activity break this morning, so I'm guessing that you already have a sense of it. So let me just briefly say that play has so many different benefits for kids growing up. When you see kids running and jumping and sliding and swinging, it's easy to understand the physical benefits of play, but play is also how kids make friends. It's how they build strong bonds with the caring adults in their lives. It's how they develop creativity and cognitive skills. So play really benefits the whole child. And the problem is, and I think we all know this from our own personal experience, play is disappearing. Think about your own childhood and compare it to how kids are growing up today. Play is disappearing, and it's having disastrous consequences on this generation of kids. This generation of kids is playing less than any generation before them. It's leaving kids unhealthy, unhappy, and falling behind academically. Now, I know throughout today, we're talking a lot about the connections between the built environment and long-term health outcomes, and so I'm not going to recover that ground. Instead, what I thought I would do is cover three things. First is some promising solutions for making it as easy as possible for kids to play. The second is focusing on equity and why we must focus on the kids who need it most. And the third is why our collective work is so urgent today. And it really calls for the need to align our efforts with other folks outside the health community who are doing similar things. So first, what do I mean by, when I say that we need to make it as easy as possible for kids to play? Some of us have tended to see the play movement as an awareness problem. And the logic goes something like, if only people knew that kids really need to play, then we can reverse this generational decline that we're seeing. And let's do a PSA campaign to tell people how important it is. But the problem is that over 90% of parents in survey after survey acknowledge the importance of play in their kids' lives. So we don't have an awareness problem, we have an action problem. We have a generation where we don't know what to do to change how they're growing up. We just know it's a problem. So 3 years ago, we set out to try to figure out what the behavioral roadblocks were that kept kids from playing more and how we can overcome them. And so we asked the experts, behavioral scientists at Ideas 42, which is a nonprofit that uses behavioral science to address social challenges at scale. And what we did was we asked them, first, what are these key challenges? And they had two key insights for us. And the first thing that they said to us was that you can go through the whole day and not even think about play for your kids. So unlike nutrition, where oftentimes when you're going to the grocery store or going to the restaurant or opening up your refrigerator at home, you're confronted with a choice between the healthy option and the unhealthy option. And behavioral scientists can take those moments, like Karen was describing, looking at where you place certain milk or water or things like that, and try to default you to the healthy behavior. When it comes to play, there are no natural moments during the day where you're forced to think about it. And then, even if you do think about it, their second insight was there are all these little hassle factors that get in the way. So think about what it takes to get to the local park. Do you have the right clothes on? Do you have the right supplies with you? Is there a safe way to get there for you and your kids? And when you get there, is there a clean, publicly accessible bathroom to use when someone has an emergency, which always happens in my family? And after you play and you're all tired and you trudge back home, then you have to get back to the 20 other things on your to-do list. And all these little hassle factors add up, and it makes it too easy for parents or other caregivers to say, sorry, now's not the time to play. So if these are the roadblocks, we then asked Ideas 42 what communities can do to overcome them. And we focused on municipalities because the reality is that most decisions that impact the ability of kids to play happen at the local level, whether that's investment in infrastructure, policy, or programming. And what Ideas 42 told us is that cities need to integrate play into everyday spaces, into the daily lives and routines of kids and families. So, yes, cities need great parks and playgrounds, great destinations for play, but they also need great playable sidewalks and playable bus stops and all the places that kids and families are already spending time in front of the grocery store or at the health clinic, time that's usually filled with moments of frustration. Play can transform these moments into moments of joy. The challenge was that when we heard these insights, we looked around to see what was happening, and you can count on one hand the examples that existed in the US of communities that were integrating play into the daily routines of kids and families. So essentially, we were working from a vision of what a playable community could look like. So we set out to create examples. And this past year, we ran a national Play Everywhere Challenge competition with great collaboration, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Target, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Playworld. And we asked for innovative, replicable ideas for integrating play into the daily environment. And what we got back was just frankly inspiring. Over 1,000 applications from all over the country and 50 winning ideas that create kid-friendly public spaces that are wondrous, inviting, convenient, challenging for kids, unifying, and shared. And these ideas are now becoming a reality. So I'd like to just share a couple of them with you. In the Bay Area, in a blighted neighborhood, they converted a lot that was used sometimes for parking, but other times just a vacant lot, into a giant sandbox. And 1,200 people showed up the first day. In Lexington, Kentucky, they have a hub and spoke bus model. So if you want to get from one part of the city to another part, you have to go into the downtown transit center and then back out. And so thousands of people are going through this transit center, and they tend to be lower income folks who are relying on public transportation. And no one wanted to spend time there, and it was unsafe for kids. Because when you have a lot of traffic with buses going by and you see yellow lines, and as parents you're trying to keep your kids away from the yellow line, kids see a yellow line, they think it's a balance beam. And so kids were always getting in the way of traffic. And so what they did, as you see here, is they created a playable installation on a wall that drew kids away from the traffic. And what we found out from Lexington is that all of a sudden, people are spending more time there. And we said, oh, did you do a sophisticated study, observation, things like that? And they said, no, the way we knew is that people started complaining that the water fountain was broken or you needed another vending machine, which really showed that people were actually valuing their time there and wanting to spend more time there. In Miami, the city's neighborhood enhancement team identified that dead-end streets were a real problem. It was a site of illegal dumping and other illicit activity. And so they commissioned local artists in 5 neighborhoods to transform these dead-end streets with paint. And the transformation was profound. And what we found was that grandparents started coming out and teaching the kids how to do hopscotch. So you have multi-generational play happening. And unexpectedly, people were starting to have date night with picnics at the new play installation in the dead-end street that used to be a problem spot for the community. In New Orleans, a group called Urban Conga transformed a bus stop in the lower 9th Ward in an under-resourced part of New Orleans into a beautiful musical play area called the Hangout. And it just radically transforms people's expectations of places like bus stops. And the nighttime, it's just really striking. And this was actually solving a specific problem. So yes, it looks beautiful. It's lit up. All of those are drums that kids can play. And it's beautiful at night. But what's really striking about it is that what we found out was that this was the bus stop for kids who were going to schools quite far away. And they were showing up at the bus stop before the sun came out. And so the light is actually a safety element in addition to being something beautiful. I don't have a photo of it, but one of the winners is Nashville, city of Nashville. And I'm sure many of you from major cities are familiar with how there's a new trend in transforming shipping containers into things like high-end coffee bars or beer gardens or things like that. What the city of Nashville did was they transformed the shipping container into a play structure. And so it feels like a permanent structure in place, but it also could be put on the back of a truck trailer and moved 10 blocks away to the next neighborhood. A really, really interesting innovation that I think has a lot of legs for replication. So these and dozens of other great Play Everywhere Challenge ideas are coming now to life, and hopefully will spur other communities to follow their lead. And let me pause here and say that, again, the impetus for all this was the research that we did with Ideas 42. And most importantly, it wasn't backward-facing assessment or evaluation. It was forward-facing research that gave us testable hypotheses to try out. And I would suggest that we need more of that type of forward-facing research to drive action. I also want to emphasize that our action needs to focus on the right communities. This is not the vision of success, but this is what we often see as solutions in cities. Which brings me to my second point. We cannot settle for solutions that benefit only a privileged few. Everywhere means everywhere. It means integrating it into everyday spaces in under-resourced communities, because we know that low-income kids spend almost 25% more time than their more affluent peers doing chores and running errands with the parents and caregivers because there's no viable alternative for childcare. It also means every public housing facility and every public elementary school and everywhere else that kids who need it most live and learn. It is shocking that in most major cities across the country, most elementary schools in under-resourced communities don't have adequate play opportunities. You take it for granted in most communities, but it's not the case where most kids live. And in these communities that we serve, one of the #1 barriers is neighborhood safety. And again, I'm not talking about the perceptions of safety when it comes to a white van snatching your kids. I'm talking about real safety concerns, unsafe traffic, illicit activity, and violence. And we need to address those concerns. Just a couple weeks ago, I was in Baltimore, and we built a playground at a public housing development in Baltimore. It was the first playground that development had ever had. So the kids who are growing up there have nothing around them to play. And those kids are experiencing a tremendous amount of adversity. And what we did was we built a playground in a courtyard which was surrounded by row houses on all 4 sides. And so, as Jane Jacobs would say, the eyes on the street are critical to neighborhood safety, and now everyone looking out of their back windows has a line of sight to where those kids are playing, and hopefully that will create a safe environment for them. And so I would emphasize that we as a community focused on health need to acknowledge this reality of safety issues in communities and find solutions that create safe zones for kids to be active, to play, to really just be kids. Which brings me to my third and final point. I think we need a renewed sense of urgency that will likely come from outside the health community. We live in very challenging times. Regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, I think everyone feels that communities are more disconnected and divided than ever. And meanwhile, our communities are too often at the point of crisis. And we certainly see that in the wake of natural disasters, but it doesn't take a natural disaster to create a crisis. And when this happens, we know that kids are too often an afterthought. But people have this burning desire to do something about it, but no outlets for doing about it. Everyone is frustrated and impatient about just more talk. And what we hear from the communities that we work with on the ground is that they've had decades of disinvestment and decades of empty promises. And there's a hopelessness that comes from that change is not possible. And we have to help overcome that hopelessness before any change is possible. And the way to do that is to create quick wins that can link to larger scale change, which we heard about earlier. We're now in our third decade as an organization, and I just want to share with you the brief history of our organization because I think it's really relevant in today's environment. So 22 years ago, our founder, Darrell Hammond, read an article in the Washington Post about a brother and sister who were 2 and 4 years old in DC. And they had gone out in the middle of the summer, it was a heat wave, looking for a place to play. They found an abandoned car, climbed inside, got trapped, suffocated, and died. And so the Post reporter went out into the community trying to figure out why this tragedy happened, and she could not find a single place to play in their neighborhood. And so Darrell was motivated to act, not to create an organization, but to solve a particular problem for a particular community, and that led to the creation of the first KaBOOM playground 22 years ago. And we've been building playgrounds in partnership with under-resourced communities ever since. This fall, we'll be building our 3,000th playground right here in DC, not too far from where the first playground was built. But I want to emphasize that the special sauce is really in how the playground gets built, because it gets to creating safe spaces and it gets to engaged communities that are going to care for kids. And our process starts with the kids. They design their dream playground, and then we help bring it to life. And the process culminates with 200 volunteers coming together in common purpose from various walks of life to build a playground in 6 hours. So it's like a modern day urban barn raising for kids. And it's a cathartic moment that makes people care about the changes that are happening in their community and gets them to think bigger about what's possible. And so, again, these quick wins are essential to drive the larger change. And it's absolutely essential to create those safe zones for kids. My final thing I'd like to share is that the immediate outcomes are not measured in terms of health. And again, I think we as a health community need to start creating linkages between these shorter term outcomes and our longer term health outcomes that we're shooting for. In the near term, we focus on a different set of outcomes. Increase in social cohesion, increase in community pride, and increase in perceptions of neighborhood safety. And I would encourage the researchers among us that we need more on how these intermediate outcomes link to the longer term health outcomes that we're shooting for. I'm by nature an optimist. I think there's a lot of good things happening in communities, and I think we've got a lot of momentum. And I think together, if we roll up our sleeves and actually engage in the change process, we can get a lot done. And so as a result, kids are going to be happier and healthier. And I'd just like to end by thanking all of you for all you do for kids in under-resourced communities, because I think together we're going to make a big difference in their lives. Thank you.